Alright, so we are going to talk today about what you have to do to work on your 7.3 and keep it running because, listen, a lot of you guys think, hey man, I'll just go get myself a new truck. And if you want to get a new Ford, I highly wouldn't recommend it because the new 6.0, 6.4, 6.7s, they do really suck. So, we're going to talk about the 7.3, how to keep it running, things to look for and maintain on your 7.3. Everybody knows that the basics, oil change, keep your air filter changed. That's one thing people make a lot of mistakes on, is keeping that air filter clean. But we're not going to talk about those things. We're going to talk about some of the common problems with the 7.3 that happen and could cause catastrophic failure or oil leaks and things like that, and things to prevent and to get your motor to run a little bit better. I'm not going to talk much about mods for upgrading the motor. I'm more of a factory, keep it original person. So there's a couple things you want to do, you can do to that aren't going to hurt anything, aren't going to that you can do to give yourself a little bit more power. Okay, so one of the things that goes out on the 7.3, if you haven't had it go out yet, is common is the turbo pedestal seals. So down below the turbo, there's a pedestal down there. I'll see if I can get my camera in there. There it is. And you can see that pedestal below. It's in the middle of that ring for pulling the engine. It's that pedestal down below there. The seals below that, and sometimes between there and the turbo, like to leak oil, and typically the ones below. And what happens is there's a little normally there's a flapper that's on that part right there. There's a little arm that comes down and goes to an actuator that's inside that pedestal, and sometimes that leaks oil. So what I did on mine is I replaced it with if you notice, I do not have that little arm on mine, and the pedestal itself does not have that little valve that goes in the side that leaks. So if you are doing that, if you want to prevent that leak and also give yourself a little bit more power, what you do is you replace it with the non-flapper cast iron end piece here for the turbo, and then replace your pedestal with the non-flapper valve setup. It's about $90 or something like that, maybe 190. I can't remember. It wasn't that much. Compared to buying a new truck, it's cheap. So it did give me a little bit more low-end boost. So that's kind of one of the things this truck seems to be lacking the most of. But it's really not too bad. Okay, the other things that I had to replace on mine, if you notice right here, these are the high pressure lines for the heads, to pressurize your heads, because your injectors are part hydraulic and part electric. So this line right here is, if you notice, the original ones are braided steel, and you think, wow, they're braided steel, so I never need to replace them. Oh no, they break, and when it goes, it will blow oil everywhere, all over your engine. And so what I did is I upgraded these, the ones you get on eBay. They're 5,000 pounds, about $160, $170 for a set, and it replaces the original ones with basically such a high pressure line that you're probably never going to have to replace it again. So if you notice, those are 5,000 pound pressure. If you see that, 5,300 pound pressure, 366 bar. Is that what that says? Yeah, 366 bar. So I replaced it with those, and some guys made those up and sells them on eBay. They're a great product. Because mine did blow up, and within a mile I had oil, about a gallon of oil leaked out before I could get pulled over. So you only have, what, 3 gallons in here, so you might be burning up your motor just because you were too cheap to replace those in advance. So if you've got an older one, replace those with the new lines. It'll save your motor and save you a roadside problem and a tow bill, because pretty much there's not a lot of people that have those in stock other than the dealer, and you're going to be towing it because you don't have any parts. So anyway, the next things you want to do and to look for on your 7.3 is your underneath here you have your oil cooler. Now for some reason these like to blow the oil cooler seals, and they start to leak oil. So if you're starting to see oil leaks on this side of your engine, you have to take out that oil cooler. There's forums out there to how to replace all those seals. If you want to prevent the oil leak, you can do it in advance, and it'll maintain that so that it doesn't leak. So it's like a long tube underneath the truck. Let's see if I can get a video of it so you can see what it looks like. Not really. It's kind of buried under there, especially if you have 4x4 like this truck does. Because like I said, you definitely don't want to buy a new one. Yeah, but if in the older ones, these are much better than the new trucks. They do have some issues, but not near as many as the new trucks do. The transmission is more the issue on all the Fords. So that's why I have a Chevy for my main driver, because it has an Allison tranny, and I have less problems with the Duramax diesel and Allison tranny combination than I do with the Ford. But this is a bucket truck, so it's gonna be here for a while. I'm not gonna get rid of it. Okay, if you notice in this video right here, you see that bellows behind the down tube there. Another thing that goes out on the Ford on the 7.3 is you'll notice sometimes when it's cold or whatever, you'll fire up the motor, and if you have the hood open, you'll see a puff of black smoke for a second. You know how when you normally fire it up, they would come out the tailpipe, and what happens is it starts to leak behind here a little bit of exhaust. Now you might think, well, that's not a big deal, but what it does is you lose some of your low end boost, and like I said, that's the biggest lagger on this truck, is the low end boost. Is, if you notice, the bottom end, they start to really, when you rev up about to mid RPMs is when you really get your power. The Duramax, I get it right off of idle, so it's a little different as far as that goes. But like I said, it's not a bad engine, it's just got its issues. So if you've got your turbo off, I don't know, I didn't do this with the engine in the truck. My piston is cracked, so which is another thing that might happen if you're pulling a lot of weight all the time. It doesn't seem to happen on the regular motors when you're just, when you're not pulling weight all the time, but I've been looking at forums and found that a lot of them have cracked pistons that are pulling weight all the time. So just occasional pulling weight, all the time pulling weight, that might be an issue sometime. It's worth rebuilding the motor, because you're not going to get a better Ford truck if you want a Ford. Okay, and so that crossover tube in the back, what it does is it'll leak, and it's because it's a rigid connection, and the new ones have the bellows, and replace that with the one with the bellows, and that will pretty much be a good fix for that. The other thing that tends to leak oil, if you've got a leak in the back of the engine behind the cylinder heads, because of the heat from the exhaust right there, there's those plugs. There's plugs in the back of the head for the high pressure oil, and they're not normally supposed to be removed, but they're there as, like, I think a boring plug for something, I can't remember. I had the heads off and I don't recall, but there's a plug back in there, and those tend to leak oil from the oil rings, and you can actually do an in-car repair and fix that by just removing the down tube, because the down tube, it's right near the down tube where it goes down the head, and those O-rings get hot. Kind of a, whoops, missed one. on that one, so that's why it doesn't. Okay, so those are a couple of the main things that go wrong and that you can get fixed. And like I said, most of the stuff is very small things that go wrong with this motor. Otherwise, they're pretty darn strong engine as far as the build of it. The stuff that's inside the motor is pretty strong. A lot of external things that I think are engineered pretty poorly, but those are usually Ford things, not international. But anyway, so those are just a few things that you might want to look at. Let me see if I can think of a couple others. If you're looking at buying one of these, the best one is with the 7.3 and stick shift tranny. Then you're going to have less issues with their automatic. Okay, well, the other issue that you run into, I ran into at about $150 miles, and some people were saying they get more than 300,000. Like I said, again, it depends on the weight you're pulling, is the injectors. So a lot of people have problems with cold starts on these trucks because of issues with the glow plug things. So if you do replace your glow plugs, make sure that you go with the original Motorcraft. They're made by a German company, glow plugs, not Bosch. The ones that they're probably okay. I don't know if the Bosch are any good, but I'm not sure. But they're made by another German company, the ones that they put in these originally. And go with the Motorcraft one, original, or don't put the Chinese ones in. You'll be hating life because you'll break the ends off and bust pistons. I've heard of guys doing that. So stay with original. If you do continue to have problems, it's usually the circuits with your glow plug relays and stuff like that. I don't know anything about that. I haven't had that issue at all. But I have had cold start problems, and the cold start problems that I had were not from the glow plugs not getting hot. They were actually from the injectors going bad. So periodically, make sure that you get a system to actually buzz test your injectors and check them and make sure that you don't have any ones going weak. Now, some guys will say, oh, well, if they're bad, then it runs on 7 cylinders or 6 cylinders or whatever if you got a bad injector. Well, that's if they're really, really bad. But if they're marginally bad, what it does is, I'm going to try to explain it to you, is remember, a hydraulic portion of the injector, and there's a electric part of the injector. And when the hydraulic part starts to wear, it won't do the proper assistance, and so when it's cold, sometimes it takes a lot more cranking to get the oil pressure on the top end up high enough to have the electric part of the injector assist enough to pull open the injector far enough. So in other words, when you first start your motor and it's cold, really cold out, maybe it's 40 degrees or less. Some of you guys might be in the zeros or whatever. It's below zero, I don't know. I don't live in a place like that. But it was like 4 degrees or less. I would have issues with this truck would start up and would run on just a number of cylinders, maybe 3 or 4 cylinders. And then as it warmed up and ran for a little while, then all of a sudden I'd start kicking on more cylinders, and then all of a sudden it'd run fine. But also with that, I had less low-end power. So it would, right out of the hole, it would give me, it have a lot more lag, like a turbo lag, and then it would rev up to about mid RPMs, about, let's say, 2200, 2500, and then all of a sudden the truck would take off and it'd have all this top end. Between 2200 and 3500, it would be screaming, and then, it would be kind of like a two-stroke dirt bike with bad rings. So that's kind of the symptoms. If you're having that problem, take a look at the injectors, get a buzz test. I would just I have the Auto Ingenuity program for forward, and I'd use that to test mine. So test those injectors, make sure that they're all buzzing really strong, and if they're any of them bad, just go ahead and replace them. And they're not near as expensive as the Chevy injectors, but those of you guys who are saying, ragging on the Duramax, I've had to replace my injectors on my Duramax. I've had to also replace them on the 7.3. So there's no difference. I haven't had any, they both haven't lasted me very long. People go, oh, well, that's because the oil you use, blah, blah, blah. That's not really true. It's just the engineering. It was, some guys are lucky. They get 200, 300,000 miles out of a set of injectors. Some guys get only 150. I got the 150, and that's just the way it worked out. So it's kind of a crapshoot. So anyway, because everything's been pretty well maintained as long as I've had the truck, and usually the phone companies are really good on their oil changes and stuff like that. They may not do very good service, but their oil changes and stuff like that are pretty regular. So anyway, that's a few of the items that I've had go out on mine. The other thing that goes out is, of course, this wonderful little vacuum pump right here. And that's something that you can buy now on eBay really cheap. And so if your vents are blowing only through your, going through the defrost vents only, then more than likely this little fella's gone out and you need to replace it. So anyway, I will talk to you guys in the next video. Just a couple pieces of advice. Not a bad engine as far as long-term goes. If you do have an issue with your pistons cracking at some point, make sure that you get not the ones from Ford. Make sure you get them directly from Molly, because they are updated. And they didn't update them because they haven't had any issues. All right. So a lot of the guys say, oh, well, that's yours. You just, 1 in a million shot. If that was true, then they wouldn't have updated the castings. So they did update the castings, and they are way bigger, way more power, way stronger than the old ones. And like I said, it's worth doing the rebuild. If you're going to rebuild it, put new pistons in, please. It will save you a lot of hassle. Talk to you on the next video. Big job to rebuild the motor on this.